fall. We see our colors here all over on a big scale with the trees, but on a smaller scale with our grasses and ferns and everything. It's a time for closing up shop, and it's a time for releasing seeds. Some are ready and others are still coming at it and developing. Come take a look at these. Look at the way they droop right there. This is Glyceria canadensis. The ducks and geese really love it and really count on it as a food source as they fly south. In the more open areas, the marsh will just be full of it. Here we see our cattail is already distributing its seeds. It looks like it's probably had some help from some of the birds. And they'll come in here and just pick that, you know. And it just looks like a feathery little thing here, but if we look carefully, you see little brown spots there. It's not just the fluff. There are seeds that fly away with it. Each one will blow and they kind of get stuck in fur and feathers and on clothing and beards, whatnot. I'll do my part. So I'm going to go out and see what else we find out here. We're in a nice patch here of our gramma grass and another one here. Here we're looking at a rush, and now we can see the flower, which was just a small thing in our earlier visit, that really it's just one leaf all the way down. There are no leaves coming off of it, and the flowers come, about 80% up, sometimes only halfway up. We've talked about a number of our different grasses, sedges, and rushes. This is Heliochorus, called a nut rush. But it really is just one leaf all the way up, and at the end is where we had our flower, and right now it's forming seeds. It's coming into fruit, and now it's the best time to identify it. But we'd have to be inside under a microscope. Well, we wouldn't be under a microscope. We'd put this under the microscope. But that's what all of these little guys are, and they form these kind of dense patches, usually just one species, and as it gets drier or wetter, it'll change to a different species, very much like the patterns we were talking about in the spring. But here we see quite a few of them. They're turning a nice straw color. Everything blends in. You've got to really kind of look. And sometimes at this time of year, you look at something like this and you have to think back. What was here? What would I see about a month and a half ago? And then you go home and you can look at those leaves and their distribution, the way they're arranged around the stem. That's known as the phyllotaxy or phyllotaxy. It's the arrangement of leaves around a stem. I think many people will know this flower right off if it were in flower. It's stunning. It's kind of a scarlet red. You might say like the alb of a cardinal, or even the feathers of a cardinal, the bird. And this is cardinal flower, Lobelia cardinalis. The fruits are still maturing, but these used to have beautiful red or white. They can have white flowers. Now the flowers have passed and we see that it's just starting to form little capsules here, which I think is much too early now probably to produce seed. But one of the things we do see a little color on the other side. You see there's a little bit of red here, but just in the stipules. And what I do is put my head next to it and shake it. You can hear them when they're ready. When they're ready, they'll let you know. Let me out. Sometimes I might find these and you might just kind of sprinkle them when they're ready. They fall out quite liberally. And unusually, just an observation, I would love to know somebody's response to this. As I visit the same patches over the years, for some reason, the plants tend to move upstream. And I don't understand that. I would think the seeds would fall and they'd wash down the stream. And there are a few patches, because you're always trying to get the most perfect photograph of the cardinal flower. For some reason, as I see the patch spread, it goes upstream. And I haven't been able to figure out why. Spore. Any evidence that an animal has passed by here is known as spore. It could be tracks, in this case a feather. It could be the chewings on a log of the beaver. It could be hairs caught on a thorn. Something that's evidence that an animal has passed here. It's a funny plant. There's the whole plant. There's one plant. This is a burr reed. So it's a reed that's like a burr. It's not really a reed, right? Doesn't quite look like a reed, but it's known as burr reed. And Sparganium is the genus. There are numerous species. I just was to collect from a very rare one the other day. As a late fall food source, it's probably pretty good for the ducks. That will get very brittle, and our seeds will just fall off of that, crumble off of that, and so I think a duck probably would be pretty successful at just nibbling away at those and getting some food, and meanwhile they're kind of sloppy eaters, and so the seeds would also fall to the sides and float away, and thereby maybe start a new population downstream or somewhere else in a pond. These can be in the edges of ponds as well, or any kind of marshy area. If you can imagine this thing with flowers in a ball like that, they're kind of white flowers in a ball, very simple flowers. That's what it looked like earlier in the summer. And now that it's pollinated, we see that each of the flowers is producing fruits. Those fruits will eventually, nope, they're not really ready to crumble, but they'll fall off kind of individually, piece by piece, and then probably float away with the fall rains. We're seeing more animal spore here, all different ways here. We're seeing tracks here, probably a great blue heron, if you get our feet in here. Now here seeing duck tracks here. We see a little duck here, and then we see them in what looks like the mud and the puddles there. Looks like we have mink tracks there as well on the left, all in the same travel here. But not just tracks. I want to back up as well and take a look here on our rock. We do have evidence of things, and we look at some of the bits here. I think those are scales. Yeah, I think we're seeing some fish scales in there and a little bit of crayfish parts, looks like. See some seeds, and it'd be nice to have evidence that seeds get spread that way. And then since we have the mink tracks next to it, classic habitat, just going right up a stream like this. It's exactly what they do. Sometimes we're making too much noise to see the wildlife, but just by seeing the tracks, it's kind of exciting to know that wildlife is around. It's just great. Solanum del Camera right there. Deadly nightshade. It's this vine that's growing up the plant. And by looking at the fruits, you probably get the idea that it's like a tomato. And they're in the same family, the tomato family, Solanaceae. This is Solanum del Camera. Not edible. Said to be deadly, but it's not really that deadly. But if I opened it up, it's very much like a tomato, isn't it? There's the skin, just like a tomato. I'm not going to eat this tomato. Not with a name like Deadly Nightshade. But a native. And just fine. And you know, you don't have to worry about dogs eating these things. Sometimes I get calls about all the plants in people's backyards and worried that their dogs are going to eat them. And they naturally know if they can either smell it or even just a little taste, and they will spit it right out. So not much of a concern there. Here's a very distinctive plant that people like. The butterflies certainly like it, and so a pretty good pollinator. It also grows in a variety of habitats. It could be just a wet meadow, a wet part of a field, and it could also be in a swamp and along a stream like we are today. It's known as boneset, and the name comes from the native people of the region using it to set bones that have been broken, and they would mash it up and make a poultice and to put around it. It's easily recognizable because of the characteristics of the leaves, that it's a little unusual. We're seeing that it looks like the stem grew right up through the middle of two leaves, but as you can see, they are attached here. And so the idea would be The native people might have looked at that and go, it looks like the two leaves have healed together, and this might be good for the healing of bones. And so we call this perfoliate when a stem goes right up through the leaves. But you can see on all of these leaves that they're all connected at the bottom. There is no separation there. And you can really see that. So boneset, Eupatorium perfoliatum. Perfoliatum because it's perfoliate and the stem goes right up through the middle of a leaf. And all the leaves grow that way. A little cluster of white flowers at the top, and you can see here that they're going to seed. It being the fall, pretty much finishing the season. And those seeds will fall in the water, maybe blow on the land, but there's enough moisture here that we'll get the batch for next season growing. And clearly, I'm in deep water, so they are really wetland plants. So that's boneset. Keep an eye out for it. White snake root, Ageratina altissima. It can grow in the woods, it can grow in an open area. Needs a little bit of moisture. Tall white snake root. Looked at that in flower, so I wanted to show it later in the season and what it looks like when it goes to seed. Here it is. This is quite a mature patch there. They're quite large. This is a nice plant to have in your yard. You might decide to collect some seed. So if you just go to a nice mature head that has a bunch of seed, and you could take it off at this point, and what I would probably do is either a paper bag would be good for these, or even an envelope that you could get in and you could kind of crush it like this. And in general, I don't use plastic bags very much. If I do, it's only because I know that I will go home and take them out of here immediately. Otherwise, they're less ideal because you might trap water in here. And so I just kind of scoop off all the seeds into my bag, and I'll take a few of these. And now many plants need to go through a cold cycle as if it's winter. And so you need to kind of freeze them, you might say. Sometimes leave them in a garage or someplace outside. With this kind of plant, more likely what I'll do is just go home and I'll just shake out the bag over the area where I want them to grow. So we have a shrub here called hobblebush or witch hobble. And at this time of year, it just begs for you to kind of talk about leaf color change and what's going on here, because here's this whole shrub and it's almost all purple. Just fabulous. Well, we happen to get the last of this year's fruit. You can see here we still have one berry left on there. You can see there used to be a whole cluster of them. And put about maybe 12 or 15 berries they put out. And they have a very flat seed. They start out green and eventually turn bright red, but blacks when they're fully ripe. And there's a seed that is kind of like a plate. It's a very flat seed that goes right across halfway through the whole middle, so it's very fleshy on one side. Lots of food there for birds and animals that would come and nibble it. So the bears might eat it, or the birds might eat that, and so the seeds will pass through their gut. And when they defecate in the landscape, they will leave the seed and start a new bush somewhere else. Our witch hobble here is just a great specimen to look at and discuss why it is that trees and shrubs change the color of their leaves in the fall. And as you may know, most of the time leaves are green. Green because of the chlorophyll, which enables them to photosynthesize and create sugars from water and the sunlight and oxygen and a little carbon dioxide as well. Producing chlorophyll also costs energy. There's an expense involved. And also typically chlorophyll's only use 1 or 2, maybe 3 wavelengths of light, and yet we know we have a full spectrum coming at us. And so the plant also produces other colors, oranges, yellows, and purples, xanthophylls, carotenoids. If you think of carrots, carotenoids are more along the orange line. Those are less expensive, you might say, to produce than the green chlorophyll. So the green is really good at capturing light. It's kind of very efficient at taking in the energy. So in the summer and the spring, when there's lots of sunlight and it's warm, it can just produce lots of chlorophyll and make a lot of food. As we get into fall, things become cooler. It could be drier. The tree gets, or shrub gets a little bit stressed. The frost will cause some stress. It stops producing the green colored chlorophyll, and instead it continues to produce the quote-unquote cheaper or less energy expensive colors of yellows and oranges and reds. And thus we see those in our other tree leaves. Here we have a very dark pigment. This plant kind of specializes in this color because it's an understory plant. This very often grows underneath a canopy of birch, beech, maple, maybe some hemlocks in there as well. So very shaded areas. Interestingly, if we were to come here with a full bush of leaves on it, we will also notice that the leaves are incredibly horizontal to catch as much light as it can, and they tend to not overlap each other, thus casting a shadow on the ones below it, which is remarkable. If we look at some of these leaves, along the veins we still see a little bit of green chlorophyll is produced and hasn't been taken back in. Edges here we see just the purple. In another week or so, these green parts will now also become purple. And so this plant is still able to make some more sugars before winter comes by turning purple. We also see here, if you can see right on top here, it has set the buds for next year. These are the leaf buds for next spring. They pop open like a couple of hands and will produce the leaf, but that's what that little bud is for. Well, we found another hobble bush here. And this one, the flowers, the fruits aren't quite ripe. And it's kind of nice to see the transition. It's a beautiful color. So again, you may think about this. If you've got some wet parts of your property, you might want to encourage these plants to grow. But there they are. They're red and they will turn black over the next few weeks, and they get even sweeter with the frost. But look at these buds. The leaves on either side for next year, and that larger part in the middle will be the flower of next year. And it's a whole cluster of flowers. So that's just great. Classic for this, we're looking at a red maple here. And we're seeing that it's started to change from green to yellows and reds appearing, and the purples as well. But in the fall, when we see the whole forest kind of changing in this way, it is just the natural stress of the change of seasons. Well, we know that later on, these leaves are going to fall off completely. And what will happen here at some point, at the base of our petiole, where it meets the branch, we're going to have a layer of cells that is going to be formed. It's going to grow right across, almost like a plate, to cut off the leaf from the rest of the tree in kind of like a healing process. And it's called abscission. And the abscission layer will form a barrier between the rest of the tree and the leaf. And at which point all you need is a breeze or something just kind of coming by and grabbing it, and it will break off right there. Later in the fall, that will have formed, closed off the plant entirely, and the leaf can fall to the ground. And thus the name fall.